some people who look at the intersections between Christianity and Stoicism will focus on things like the way that Stoic thought influenced people like St. Paul, who wrote his letters, who was pretty much a contemporary, for example, of Seneca.
Yeah.
But I'm no scriptural scholar. That's not my particular area where I delve into. When I look at the intersection of Stoicism and Christianity, I'm mainly looking at it through the lenses of later Catholic and Christian thinkers, philosophers, and theologians who specifically reference the Stoics. They make a comment about Musonius Rufus or Epictetus, or that they cite them when they're covering some issue that they pull from them. My main area of expertise there is in the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, because I would come to discover that though this brilliant philosopher and theologian of the 13th century, it's not believed that he read Greek. He was proficient in Latin. So I don't recall that he cites Epictetus or Musonius Rufus or Aurelius, but he was very conversant with Seneca. He also cites Cicero a lot, who told us a lot about the Stoics. But yeah, for example, so Thomas uses Seneca talking about a variety of topics, including when he addresses anger, the nature of anger, virtues like gratitude and clemency. So I just found, in my readings over the years, there are many times that prominent Christian thinkers pull approvingly, from the works of the Stoics. So my kind of theme for writing that book for my typically Christian audience is to say, hey, there's plenty of value that comes from human reason, that comes from the Stoic philosophy. It's valuable to anybody today, whether you're a Christian or believe some other religious faith or don't even have a faith. There's some really valuable lessons there in the Stoics, a lot of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really kind of healthy approach, really. And I started becoming very interested in this, not only because I grew up in faith and I grew up, as a Mormon, but also, I even, one of my first clients who I coached through my kind of Stoic mindset coaching was a minister over in Canada. Shout out to Laura there. And she was using Stoicism to essentially enhance her Christianity and to enhance the way that she viewed her relationship with God. And so what do you think that Stoicism has to offer people of faith, people in the Christian faith? Because I do have a lot of Christian listeners, and I think that it's something that can cross over very easily. But what do you think Stoicism has to offer?
Sure. I'll get started with a very, very basic general sense here. The Gospels tell us Christ was asked, what are the most important of all the commandments? And he says the greatest commandment is to love God basically with all that we are, and then our neighbor as ourself. So I say, okay, and that's not really necessarily easy to do, right? To put our entire focus upon God, to love our neighbors with the same kind of intensity that we care for ourselves. But I'm saying the Stoics, one thing they do, they can kind of provide us the mechanisms, tools, instruments to do that, because it's hard to have that kind of focus, that kind of love, if you're worried about things, if you're fearful, or if you're anxious, or if you're angry at other people, or if you're envious, if you wish you had what they had. So on one very basic level, the Stoics can help us, tame in our emotions. Christian virtue is often seen in terms of, or for the natural virtues anyway, bringing our emotions, our passions in line with right reason. That's the way Thomas Aquinas writes about it. And the way I see it, the Stoics, are very much along the lines of that idea. So just in one general way, it's just this idea it can provide us kind of a technology for doing what we're called to do, to have the fullest lives, be the most loving people we can be by not being overrun by all distress and emotions.
Yeah, definitely. And so how do you specifically use Stoicism in your life? Like, do you have any rituals? Do you have any preferred methods through which you incorporate it into your life?
Oh, yes. The main one, I'm a bibliophile. I love to read books. So part of my daily read, I'm also a very early riser. I may get up at 3:30, 4 in the morning. So I always include some Stoic reading early on. Either something from one of the major Stoics, usually Seneca or Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius or Musonius Rufus, or some of the many modern books out there. So I'll try to read something about the Stoics or by the Stoics. Right now I'm going through Ryan Holiday's and his co-authors, The Daily Stoic, for example.
Yeah.
Just reading those little clips every day. So I try to do that, through reading to kind of orient myself to the day. Probably one that I use most often, and I've talked about this in talks before, that I know, for example, Seneca talks about reflections at the end of the day. You're kind of examining what you did during the day. Did you live up to your principles? Where did you fail? But being such an early riser, I fall asleep as soon as my head hits the pillow usually, so I don't do that. But I do typically try to start with morning reflections. And one of my favorites is the one from the second chapter of Aurelius's Meditations, where he says, say to yourself every morning upon arising, today I will encounter the busybody, the thankless, the overbearing, the envious, the unneighborly, and so on, kind of preparing yourself for what you're going to encounter during the day. And even though we're a couple thousand years almost after Marcus Aurelius, we're still going to encounter those people, But part of his exercise is to prepare in advance for negative things you're going to encounter from other people, but also remind yourself, as Epictetus says, that whatever it is they're doing, it may not be the best behavior, but in some way they think it's right. So we shouldn't hate them for that. But we also need to remember, too, that their inappropriate actions cannot truly disturb what's highest in us. They can't make us, unvirtuous or disturb our souls in the most profound way. So that's probably one of the basic exercise I use probably most often, is just kind of preparing in advance to bear the kind of insults or injustices you might face during a day. And so instead of flying off the handle, you're ready in advance.